The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.
Another important event took place in Tbilisi, Georgia. Namely, Tbilisi hosted the two-day Tbilisi International Conference 2022, Slava Ukraini by the McCain Institute at Arizona State University, the George W. Bush Institute, and the Economic Policy Research Center, EPRC. Experts, leaders, and policymakers from the United States and Europe held high-level discussions about Ukraine and Georgia, the future of NATO and the EU, and democracy in general, given ongoing Russian military aggression and disinformation. The conference occurred as Russian forces still occupy over 20% of Georgian land, and the Kremlin persists in nuclear and conventional sabre-rattling and meddling in the internal affairs of Eastern European countries, including Georgia. Georgians know what it is like to live with a belligerent autocrat like Vladimir Putin as a next-door neighbor, and they know what it is like to have his army invade your sovereign country, said McCain Institute Executive Director Dr. Evelyn Farkas. There is no better place than Tbilisi, Georgia, to discuss the future of Ukraine, the transatlantic relationship, and how to shore up our efforts to defend democracy and defeat Putin's aggressive and illegal foreign policy. I've been involved with this conference since it was started in 2014 by Nino Evgenidze and EPRC with the McCain Institute, said David J. Kramer, the Bradford Freeman Managing Director of Global Policy at the Bush Institute. I'm thrilled this year that George W. Bush Institute is a partner, which reflects our great interest in Georgia and the region. Indeed, this conference underscores the enduring friendship between the people of Georgia and the people of the United States during these very challenging times. David Kramer read out the message that President Bush has sent to Georgian people and the attendees of the Tbilisi International Conference 2022. We will never relent in our call for Russia to end its occupation of 20% of your nation's territory and for Moscow to respect your country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Even when we voice concerns about developments in your country, we do so as friends and allies of Georgia. We want to see Georgia succeed and take its rightful place as a full-fledged member of the democratic community of nations. This is especially true in light of Vladimir Putin's unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine, something sadly to which Georgians can relate. Georgians can also relate to Ukrainians' desire to live in freedom and enjoy the fruits of liberty. The message from the 43rd President of the United States read. We dedicated our 6th annual reunion to Ukraine. We want to honor the Ukrainian people who are defending not only their independence and sovereignty, but also the vision of a Europe whole, free, and at peace. Whatever it takes, and as long as it takes, we stand for Ukraine, we stand for freedom, said EPRC Executive Director Nino Evgenidze. This is the 6th convening of the Tbilisi Conference since 2014.
This is, as you are well aware, one of the main events happening in Georgia every year. Unfortunately, we had this 2-year pause caused by the pandemic, and now we have reinstalled, relaunched the conferences. We are very happy to see the heavy attendance on the conference. We have very interesting guests. We have a lot of experts, a lot of politicians. We have a lot of people who are dealing with the security policy issues in the region. And I think the panels which are scheduled today and tomorrow will address all the challenging items on the table of the contemporary world. Ukraine, what is happening in Ukraine directly affects the situation in Georgia. Ukraine must win in order for the whole world to survive this Russian aggression against the democracy, against the free world, against the sovereignty of other countries.
Key participants in the 2022 Tbilisi Conference, aside from Farkas, Kramer, and Evgenidze, include former U.S. ambassadors to Ukraine Bill Taylor, John Herbst, U.S. ambassador to Georgia Kelly Degnan, Echo from CSIS, and others. And the checkpoints had the chance to talk to some of them on different topics. The US Ambassador Kel Degnan was interviewed by McCain Institute Executive Director Dr. Evelyn Farkas in a special panel at the conference.
And I think it's important to remember that the biggest threat to Georgia is Russia, to Georgia's security, its stability, truly its prosperity, as well as its democracy, is Russia. And it has been for centuries. This isn't new for Georgians. This is just the latest version of it. It is also important, I think, to remember that that is always in the back of many Georgians' mind, is that shadow, that long shadow of Russia that Russia uses so effectively sometimes to create confusion, to sow division, to instill fear in people. And you know, they're masters at that. They've been doing that for a long time. That is why the United States has spent 30 years helping Georgia improve its ability to deter and defend its own borders. It's a defensive approach that I think has proven very effectively in Ukraine, where a similar approach was taken. Build that capacity to defend your borders. And we are seeing now some important lessons play out in Ukraine as those years of training are put into action. It is a good question for this week in particular, because tomorrow I'm going up to the mountains to watch a tabletop exercise. Well, actually, it's a real-life exercise that involves emergency response capabilities that are part of a comprehensive defense approach that Georgia is developing with support from the United States and other NATO partners, because it is the modernization of Georgia's defense forces to be able to operate through a comprehensive defense approach. It furthers interoperability with NATO, which is something that Georgia has been excelling at because of its contributions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and in other operating theaters with NATO and bilaterally with NATO allies. And then, of course, on Friday, we have the Distinguished Visitors Day that wraps up Noble Partner, which has been a large military operation that's done every other year, just to watch Georgia's, improvement in being able to now host a huge multinational exercise like Noble Partner, or last year, Agile Spirit. It's not the United States and Georgia doing this. It is Georgia organizing a multinational, large-scale exercise that really does test what we have seen in Ukraine to be essential military skills to defend this country and to work together as a really effective force. Our firm belief is that a strong defense force is the best deterrent to making Georgia once again a target of Russian aggression. So we are absolutely, as you said, Evelyn, working very hard to keep Georgia out of any kind of conflict, whether it's this Ukraine conflict or any other, by giving them the skills to be able to push back, defend their borders, conduct a resistance campaign that is a whole of society effort. That's a country like Georgia in this location and this size needs a whole of society response to the kind of threat that Russia presents. So the military cooperation is obviously long been at the core of our partnership, because we understand for Georgians, the first thing on their mind is the stability and security of their country. We can grow from there, and Georgia has grown from there, but that confidence that they can defend their own borders is at the heart of it. And we want to continue to be with them in developing that capability. We ask all of the countries, whether they're in this region or not, to do what they can to close the net, because that is how sanctions are most effective. Sanctions are intended to change behavior, and the best way to have them be effective is if there are no loopholes. And that is the message that we've asked the Georgian government too. The Georgian government immediately complied with the financial sanctions. We didn't even have to go in to ask them before the National Bank was closing that net, and has continued to be very vigilant about the financial sanctions. We work very closely as a result of our long partnership with Customs and with the Border Police to try and, again, close the loopholes, close the holes as much as we can at the ports and at the borders. And that is the result, to go to my earlier comment, that's the result of years of working together with Georgian agencies, building capacity, the training. We are seeing it come into play now, and the equipment that we've been able to provide, again, not just the United States, but other friends of Georgia's as well, to try and get a better sense of what is coming across the border or coming in through the ports. Of course, if you look around this region, there are examples that Georgia and others can point to and say, well, they're not doing it, or they're only doing this, and so it's not a, it's for those who are looking to for excuses. It's easy to point to neighbors that have more of an impact on the effectiveness of sanctions than some people here. Little Georgia, what can we do? I'm sure you've heard that argument. What we can do is continue to encourage Georgia to do everything it can, and the understanding that the victory of in this conflict, the fastest way to bring peace, which is what we are all working very hard to do, is bring peace as quickly as possible to Ukraine and this whole region, is for us to stick together on sanctions enforcement, watching for export control violations. And I'm sure you know that there's no slam dunk for that. All we can do is work as closely as we can with the partners through the capabilities, with the equipment that we've developed over the years. I can't give you a 100% it's not happening answer. I can say that we have seen cooperation with financial sanctions and with the agencies that we work with here to try and stem that flow as best as possible. And I think it's important that other countries, too, are doing the same, so that it is a stronger argument for all of us to be able to make. There needs to be an understanding of not just of the Black Sea, but how the Black Sea links up with Central Asia and Asia. I mean, I think we're starting to see that as we're all looking at alternatives to this northern corridor, and the really important role that Georgia can play in that, a huge opportunity for this country. And I think that opportunity needs to be developed even as these other challenges on other fronts are being worked and waged, because that's going to be part of Georgia's security and stability too. When it becomes an essential throughway for Central Asia, whether it's energy or goods, it will involve collaboration with Azerbaijan, with Central Asian states, with how the Caspian Sea is used in global trade and transport, as well as linking all those up to Europe. Of course, it's not only energy and transport that flow through those corridors, it's ideas, it's relationships, it's networking. And all of that, I think, is part of anchoring Georgia in that role between Europe and Central Asia. Anything that is anchoring Georgia more with its European neighbors and with Europe writ large is very positive, very strong. It's why these conferences are important. It's why your visits are important. We were very fortunate to have a bipartisan visit by Senator Shaheen and Senator Portman a year ago, and we've had other congressional delegations come despite COVID to demonstrate the concern about the democratic tensions here and the deep polarization, but also to demonstrate the deep and continuing support of the United States at every level: Congress, the White House, State Department, the public, academics, people who know and love this country and are deeply invested in its success. And part of that, I think, is developing its role, not just in the South Caucasus, but in the broader region: Black Sea, Caspian, Europe, and Euro-Atlantic.
One of the, we could say, most important topics as the winter is approaching is, of course, gas prices, especially in the context of economic sanctions imposed on Russia because of its invasion in Ukraine. Ed Cho from CSIS said he is skeptical about the price cap idea.
It's impractical and it won't work. But I think more concerning is how long this has taken. The U.S. Treasury Department first floated this idea in the spring, and then the G7 leaders agreed to explore it at the end of June in the summit in Germany. And last Friday's statement from the G7 finance ministers contained no details about how they're going to implement this, including what is the level of the most basic question of what is the level of the price cap to be. And they're giving themselves until December to finally come up with a plan. And in the meantime, Ukrainians are dying and their country is being destroyed. So there's not the sense of urgency on this sanction, even if it were effective, why it's taken so long to put a plan together. So I would say that the G7 finance minister's statement was empty of real action.
On the discussion panel at Tbilisi International Conference 2022, Ed Cho focused on the importance of communicating with the population for them to understand the importance of supporting Ukraine.
I would imagine for any government, it would put great stress on the politics of a country when consumers and industries' energy bills go up. Which is why I said during the panel discussion why we need to explain to our own population the stakes of this war in Ukraine, which we, at least in America, has not done as well, and some European countries have done better than others.
Ed Cho believes that it will be a very hard winter.
Regardless of what actions you take now, gas prices have gone through the roof. There will need to be rationing in certain countries. Certain industries will have to stop production. So it's going to be tough. And I think the conventional wisdom is that Europe will go into recession this winter.
What is the way out of this situation? Ed Cho elaborated a little bit on this part as well for the checkpoints.
Well, I think in the short run is to reduce demand, in all forms. So more conservation, greater energy efficiency would be needed. Getting additional supply takes much longer. You can cut your consumption in 1 or 2 years, but in order to get real supply increases, it takes maybe 3 to 5 years. So it's going to be a tough couple of years at least.
Georgia hasn't been affected much yet, such as Ed Cho's impression and the impact of Russia's invasion in Ukraine. Why? Here is his perspective.
Partly because it's not actually connected to the European market. You get most of your gas from Azerbaijan, but also Russia, and that continues to flow. I don't think the impact in Georgia, ironically, will not be as severe as it would be in Europe, which is not the usual circumstance. Usually Georgia gets hit worse. But I don't think in this case. Additional Azerbaijani gas transiting Georgia to European markets is potentially a good thing to happen.
According to Viola von Kramon, a German politician of Alliance 90, the Greens, who has been a member of the European Parliament since 2019, the only country benefiting from this war at this stage is Georgia.
Financially, economically, Georgia is the only country benefiting from the war. Lari has stabilized, the economy is almost skyrocketing, you have almost two-digit growth in the GDP. Russians come over with a lot of capital. That could be a political risk, but maybe at the moment it's good for Georgia. It's stabilizing the economy. So, of course, we would hope that the Georgian government has an interest to integrate more in the European market, to take the funds from the European Union for connectivity, to have this deep sea port, to have railway going on with connection to Azerbaijan and others. So there are a lot of projects going on, and for that, of course, we need to set up the additional standards where we are ready for, and we are also waiting for the Georgian government to commit on this.
In light of what we have opened today is the checkpoints, the homework that the Georgian government has to do before Georgia gets an EU candidate status, Viola von Kramon highlighted the judiciary reform as the crucial one on this path.
It's very important. I mean, without independent judiciary, without independence of judges and prosecutors, you cannot run a modern country. It is one of the crucial pre-measures before you start to implement other reforms.
The checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.